This is the cheapest brand new autofocus lens you can buy for Fujifilm. But is it any good? And is it for you? This is the TTArtisan 27mm 2.8. And it is the second TTArtisan lens that I have reviewed on my channel. So after I mentioned in my review of their 25mm f2 that I wouldn't mind trying out this autofocus bigger brother out, they agreed to send it to me for the purposes of this review. I don't have to send it back, but I was not paid for this video and all thoughts expressed are my own. Now this is an interesting lens because it's basically just a copy of Fuji's own 27mm 2.8, a lens which I have owned in the past and was never really a big fan of. Yes, its size was compact, but I always felt that its autofocus performance was slightly lackluster, and for the price, I always ended up using the 23 f2. I felt like that lens was just better value for money, especially considering that they were the same price. You know, the cost of that Fuji 27 2.8 is a big reason why I believe that this TTArtisan lens presents such tremendous value. So that Fuji lens, if you can find it, is around 500 Australian dollars for the WR version, which is the only one that I would actually consider, as I can't stand a lack of aperture rings on my lenses. That's why I got rid of the Sigma 18-50 zoom. Decent lens, but no aperture ring really killed me. So, you know, even if you go for the regular non-WR version of the Fuji 27, it's still around 350 or so dollars. And that is nearly twice of what this lens costs. Wait, how much is this lens again? $200. Damn, that is really cheap. And look, I mean, it sure doesn't feel that way in the hand either. It's made entirely out of metal and the aperture ring feels nice and secure. You definitely won't be accidentally knocking the ring during use. It also, like the 25 f2, is absolutely tiny, and I've really enjoyed having it mounted on my X-T5 as a bring everywhere lens and camera combo. And there's a lot more to like about it too. So the autofocus is powered with STM motors. So they're not quite linear motor speeds, but it is snappier than the Fuji variant with its external focusing motor, and I found it to hit focus fairly often. So the 27mm focal length is roughly a 40.5mm full frame equivalent, and it is the perfect everyday focal length for capturing so many different things. So from photos of people to landscapes to even some portraits. The very first lens that I had when I first started taking photos in 2014 was the Canon 40mm f2.8 mounted on a 5D Mark I, and that combo was tiny. I mean, in DSLR terms, of course. Compared to this, it was actually quite large, but it was super versatile, and I really loved learning how to take photos with it. And when compared to other sort of prime lenses and other focal lengths, I think that the 40mm, equivalent, or the 27mm in this case on APS-C, I think it's a really useful focal length, because 50 can be a little bit too tight sometimes for general photos of people and stuff like that. And a 35 might be a little bit too wide to do portraits and stuff with. So 40mm smack dab down the middle, it's a lot more practical and it's a lot more versatile, and I've really enjoyed using this lens just as a general sort of everyday carry lens, and the size of it definitely really helps, especially on the X-T5. Like the 25 f2, this thing's absolutely tiny. But what is the image quality like? After all, that is one of the most important aspects of a lens, right? Well, it's good. Is it world class? No, it is not. But for the price, it's hard to beat. And it's fairly sharp, even wide open at 2.8, and stop down to f5.6 and above, and the image quality, I would say, is really good. I will say that compared to the 25mm f2, it's definitely much better in the corners, but the center sharpness is fairly similar. I think that the images that it delivers are fairly close to what the Fuji version can deliver, and given that it costs half as much, it is seriously impressive. I think on a camera like the X-T5, it really highlights a lot of the optical flaws of this lens, the 40 megapixel sensor does. I think if you were to use this on a older body, the lower resolution will hide some of the flaws that this lens has, some of the optical flaws that this lens has. And also, if you guys are enjoying the way that the photos look in this video, they were all edited with my brand new preset pack. Link will be in the description, so definitely be sure to check that out. The bokeh characteristics are good too, and you can definitely use it for some portrait action, and the good center sharpness and excellent chromatic aberration control is great when shooting it wide open. So I do notice that image contrast does suffer slightly when at f2.8, and it improves as you step up to f4 and above though. The lens cap that it comes supplied with also features this USB-C port, which allows you to update the lens firmware as well, which is really great that they include this with the lens rather than have it be an additional accessory that you need to buy separately. So on the latest firmware, I find that the autofocus to be very reliable and snap. The only downside of this, however, is that you can only update the firmware on Windows. Mac is not supported, unfortunately. Moving on to the downsides, I think the vignetting, which was somehow, was really bad on the 25 f2, is somehow worse on this 27 2.8. I noticed fairly strong vignetting even at 5.6, but you can always correct this in post. It's very, very easy. It's literally just the vignette correction slider in Lightroom. It's really not that difficult. So I can't really knock too many points off for that. One of my biggest disappointments, however, with this lens has to be the very average 35 centimeter close focusing distance. So while the Fuji variant is 34 centimeters, so it's not that much difference, the 25 f2, a lens which was less than half the price, had an astonishing 25 centimeter close focusing distance, which when you couple that with the f2 aperture meant that you could get some really amazing and interesting almost macro photos with this really cool depth of field. Whereas on this 27 2.8, you just can't blow out the background as easily. That might not be an issue to you. You might not really care about that. At the end of the day, like a rangefinder lens can only go down to 0.7 of a meter. So maybe that's not a problem, but I think for me, having used that 25 f2 initially, I sort of hoped that this would have that same close focusing distance because it kind of works like almost like a pseudo macro lens, which I thought was really, really cool. Perhaps it's because of the autofocusing motor in it that you physically can't do it because dimensions wise, they are very, very similar in size, which is great. But yeah, I really wish that it had that close focusing distance of its manual focus cousin. Another thing that I really don't like, and this is kind of like a routine thing that I start to complain about, but the lens cap, I think it's better than the screw-on metal cap from the 25 f2, but it's really small and it lacks like a decent grip to remove it. So it kind of frequently just fell out of my hands when taking it off. I think it's a little bit too fiddly. This review has taken a little bit of time to come out. I've put a lot more time into testing it than I did with the 25 f2. So I've got this lens, I think they sent it to me. I got it about just over a month ago. And so I've had a little bit of, I've had a decent amount of experience with it. I've pretty much had it glued to my X-T5 this entire time. And I've really sort of put it through its paces and I've tested it out and I'm impressed. I am definitely very, very impressed. I was not expecting it to be as decent as it is. And I love how compact and small this lens is. So like the 25 f2, it makes any camera that you put it on just so tiny and easy to bring with you everywhere, which especially if you're learning how to take photos, I think is so important because you should want to bring your camera with you everywhere. Because the only way you're going to ever improve your photography skills is by taking more photos. Honestly, I'm torn on whether I like this lens more than 25 f2 though. So while I think the autofocus is great, I loved the manual aspect of the 25 f2. It really does make photography really fun, and the close focus distance was such a fun bonus as well. Personally also thought that the 25 f2 might have been built just a little bit nicer. It just felt more dense. I think the metal felt a bit better. I'm not sure why, but I think the aperture ring on the 27 is nicer, but I like the build of the 25 f2 just a little bit more. And that was also half the price, but that lens was not autofocus and can't take away from that fact. And I think the autofocus nature of this lens, and I think the autofocus as well, is actually pretty good. It definitely is not as accurate as like a red badge Fuji zoom or like the new 18-14 WR prime, but those lenses cost, let me think, how much is the 18-14 WR prime? That is like a $1,300 lens. So it's like 5 times more than this lens here. And it's unfair to compare it to that. I think the autofocus is good enough. And I think that if you use it on a older camera, which doesn't have 40 megapixels, so any of the Fuji cameras that have between 20 to 25 megapixels, I think that it'll render the images just a little bit nicer because I think the 40 megapixel sensor really like highlights a lot of its image flaws. But still, that being said, there's not really any chromatic aberration that I can tell. The image contrast loss at 2.8 is there, but you can always correct it in post if you wanted to. And the sharpness, at least the center sharpness, is pretty damn good. And also even the corner sharpness is not bad at all. I think from 5.6 onwards, this lens is really, really good. And it definitely, even on an X-T5, is still usable, still totally usable. Once again, I would like to thank TTArtisan for sending this one to me for review. I think for the price that it is, you really can't go wrong with either this or its manual focus younger sibling, the 25 f2. If you'd like to purchase this lens, I'll have an affiliate link down below, and it's also available for Sony E mount and Nikon Z mount as well. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you'd like to see more great photography content. I have heaps more coming in the future. Have a great day. Bye.